Well, hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar entitled Sustainability Watch, Scaling the National Measurement of Conservation Practices. I'm Chris Boomsma, Director of Education at the American Society of Agronomy. It's my privilege, once again, as with all webinars, to be the moderator today. So with that, I'd like to get this started. Okay, but before we get started, a few key things. First of all, I wanted to thank today's sponsor, who is Florosat. Their generous sponsorship of this webinar brings it to you free of charge. Brings you great, interesting information on the science that they're going to talk about, along with discussing some opportunities for you. So we thank Florosat very much. And just a note, as we say with all of our ASA webinars, sponsorship of this webinar does not imply endorsement of a sponsor's views, products, technologies, and or procedures by the American Society of Agronomy, or ASA. Okay, so thank you, Florosat. Next item, let's talk a little bit about housekeeping. Now, if you are having any issues, maybe you're not seeing something properly on your screen, the sound isn't working, you couldn't hear me now, obviously, but you can see my screen. The key is to reach out to Lacey Edwardson with any issues. A lot of times I have folks reach out to me directly and I can only respond to those so quickly because there's other things going on in the background. So please reach out to Lacey Edwardson by email or by phone. Both contact points are on your screen at this time. Note that this webinar is worth half a CEU in soil and water management and half a CEU in crop management, or one CEU in professional meetings, and that depends on your particular certification. Now, we will have a nice question and answer period at the end of this webinar, probably about 10 minutes or so of question and answer time. So please type your questions in the questions box at any time, submit them to me. It'll come directly to me. I'll take a look at them, order them, organize them, scan through them, and then I will pose those to the presenters at the end, and they will respond accordingly. So please submit your questions to me. I really look forward to hearing from you. Next, please note that this training session is being recorded. So both the recording from today's presentation and the slides are going to be made available to you about 1 week after completion of this presentation. Often we try to get it out sooner though. Lastly, please be on the lookout for future webinars offered by both the American Society of Agronomy and Soil Science Society of America in the coming months. We are in the heart of webinar season. We have a lot of stuff coming out, so please come back. Please visit us, and please learn a lot more about things related to soil science and agronomy. All right, so with that, I want to get moving on to today's webinar, and we start by introducing the speakers. Our first speaker that I want to introduce is Steve Hagen, who is the Chief Operating Officer and a Senior Scientist at Dagan. He brings expertise to Dagan's development of new and critical technologies. He has technical strengths in the extraction of land surface information and the interpretation of large geospatial data sets. He leads the company's research team in the development of effective environmental technologies, and his unique skill set allows him to make technology that improves environmental outcomes in agriculture and forestry. And Steve will introduce himself a little bit more in a second. Okay, our next speaker is Anastasia Volkova, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Florosat. She's a TEDx speaker, an Amelia Earhart Fellow, and an MIT 35 Under 35 Innovator. In late 2016, she founded Florosat. Since then, she's taken the company through a transformational journey of commercializing ag science, attracting leading investors, and scaling into the global market. Her passions are to make science-based agronomy and sustainable crop management an industry standard and to foster close collaborations between industry and research. So Steve, Anastasia, welcome to both of you. And Anastasia, I'm now going to make you presenter. And when you're ready, go right ahead, show us your slides, and take it away.
Thank you so much, Chris, for having us. Thank you to all of the crop advisors, conservation agents, to all CCAs who joined us today. It is my privilege to be here alongside Steve, one of the great science minds in conservation. I would like to pass to Steve to talk a little bit about the project sponsors that we have ourselves, the people with who we collaborate to deliver a next generation of conservation science. And I'm really looking forward to diving into the webinar with you all, discussing what is it that's coming up, how to make sense of what's happening in the conservation space, and how you can get involved. Steve?
Yeah, thanks so much, Anastasia. And thank you very much, Chris, for hosting the webinar. It's really exciting to be here discussing conservation ag with you all. And Anastasia, yeah, I really appreciate your leadership and looking forward to what our burgeoning partnership can bring to this space. And yeah, before we dig into any technical or sort of product related things, I want to start by, I can't say enough about the support and the partnerships that have made the system that we're going to discuss here today possible. We at Dagan have made the technology, but that's one part of getting a system like this off the ground and getting data into the hands of people who can really make good use of it. So yeah, just to go through some of those key partners, and this is not an exhaustive list, but these are the people that I think it's important to really address here. NASA and the USDA funded early development of the system and provided a technical oversight board during the process. The Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research is supporting the continued expansion of the technology. Our partners at the Nature Conservancy and the Conservation Technology Information Center have been partners from early on in the process of the technology development. They've helped raise funds for the continued development and structure a large validation effort that you'll hear a little bit more about. The Ecosystem Service Market Consortium is a key continuing partner in ensuring the technology can meet the needs of these burgeoning ecosystem service markets. And then certified crop advisors and soil and water conservation district folks have helped us collect data across the US that we use to validate the remote sensing products. So a lot of, and that's just really the tip of the iceberg in terms of the folks that have contributed. But yeah, we couldn't have made it to this point without the support of a lot of different folks. So yeah, maybe Anastasia, I will jump into a little bit of, provide a little bit of context for our work on soil health, and dig into the technology that we put together at Dagan before I hand it back to you. Does that sound good?
Steve, almost. I guess let's discuss let's engage our audience. We have lots of people on board. If we can have the questions pulled up, just to gauge your guys and girls, all of your experience with conservation practices. Are farmers asking you about it? Are farmers asking you about carbon markets? You will see a quick poll just coming up on your screens. First question being, do you get requests from growers for assistance with the selection of adoption of conservation practices? You can answer yes frequently, infrequently, or no, not at all, depending on your experience. We did our best trying to come up with answer options for you, so please choose the one that's most close to representing the situation which you experience on that.
Yeah, Anastasia, results are coming in nicely, and we've pretty much steadied out here at about 33% saying yes frequently, 55% saying infrequently, and 13% saying no, not at all. So those are the results for that poll. Should I move on to the next one?
Yes, please, Chris.
All right, so there's your results for the first, and let's move on to the second now. All right, here's your next poll, folks. If you could be so kind as to answer, we'd much appreciate it. All right, excellent. Got about half of you have voted so far, so if you could keep going, that'd be fantastic. This is important data for us, and I'm sure you all would like to know what the trends are. All right, just a few more seconds. We're pretty much leveling off here. Okay, that's it for that one. We got 9%, 29%, and 57% respectively. And so I will share those results. So there you are, folks. Those are the results of that poll. So with that, Anastasia, I'm now going to hide the polling information. And if you'd like to take it over and continue with your slides, they should be up. We can see them. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Chris. Really appreciate y'all answering the questions. It's very interesting for you as a community as well as it is for us. And who do we have on the webinar today, as well as we appreciate that we almost got 1,000 registrations, so there'll be a lot of viewership on demand afterwards. But generally speaking, only 13% are not really getting requests from farmers, and 50% are getting them infrequently, with around 30% getting them quite frequently. So this is very much a pressing topic, and most of you on the second poll said that you would like to learn more. So let's dive in and learn more. Steve.
Thanks, Anastasia. So yeah, on that, the first slide, I'll provide a little bit of context here. Yeah, is there one before that, Anastasia? There we go. Perfect. That's the context slide I was looking for. So I think as you all know better than anyone, improvements to soil health can have significant benefits to a wide array of stakeholders. I think first and foremost, growers can see increased profits, better return on investment through things like reduction in required inputs, yield resilience during extreme weather years, wet, dry years, and income from these burgeoning ecosystem service markets is becoming more and more a reality. So growers sit at the top of that list of stakeholders for sure. Obviously, also the local community can see improvements in water quality through reduced sediment and nutrient runoff in local waterways, and the broader community can see benefits from quality food being grown in healthy soils, as well as potentially mitigation of climate change through carbon sequestration in the soil. But it's not always easy to convince growers to use practices that benefit soil health. And I think there are a lot of reasons for that. Upfront costs associated with the changes can be an issue, and just change from how we've done things in the past can be hard for everyone. But fortunately, there are programs incentivizing growers to take another look at adopting some of these soil health practices, and they're in a lot of cases really taken off. And those are incentive programs put together by consumer packaged goods companies or input providers. They're supporting growers in their network with incentives. NGOs like the Nature Conservancy, Walton Family Foundation, Soil Health Partnership, and Soil Health Institute, they're working to spread the word about the benefits of these practices, and state and local federal governments are establishing cost share programs. So there's really a growing set of support and incentives for these practices, as you all know. And these incentive efforts, though, they need to be supported by information to really take off and be successful. And it's important to know where soil health practices are being used and understand the effects of their use. With that information, we can help organizations target areas for new incentive programs, potentially based on low historic adoption rates or based on likely beneficial outcomes. I think the information can also help organizations evaluate how well programs have worked in the past and sort of select the more effective programs. Information can help us better understand the links between no-till and cover cropping and yield resilience across the U.S. and they can support ecosystem service markets by reducing transaction costs. So I think information is really important, but consistent information on the use of these practices has not always been available. The spatially comprehensive survey data from the NRCS and CTIC program, the Crop Residue Management Survey, that was defunded in the mid-2000s, and since then it's been difficult to really get that spatially comprehensive information. So we're not the first people to explore this, but the technology that I'm going to share with you here, is built on the path of the work that others in the U.S. research institutions and universities have put forward in the past, and so I'm excited to jump in and tell you about the system that we've built and tested and applied to automatically map tillage practices, cover crops, and crop rotations, as well as the outcomes across wide areas through time. And so, yeah, thanks. This is the perfect slide here, Anastasia. So this is the technology that we use at Dagan and in our partnership with Florosat. And I'll share some results of the application of this technology. I'll say up front that we really combine two basic technologies to get the information that I'm talking about here. We combine a remote sensing tool to map the practices. We combine that with a soil biogeochemical model to examine the soil health outcomes. And here I'm going to focus mostly on that remote sensing tool that we call OpTIS, but we'll also get into soil biogeochemical modeling from DNDC as well. And so OpTIS, what is it? The Operational Tillage Information System is the acronym that we came up with there, but it's really more than just tillage practices. The system also generates information on cover crops and crop rotations, and it uses publicly available remote sensing data to map and monitor those practices across wide areas and back through time. The raw tillage practice information and the raw cover crop information from OpTIS is generated at the subfield scale at a 30-meter pixel scale, but the algorithms are applied across wide regions like the Corn Belt and the continental scale, the US. So, and these data go back through time. So they're longitudinal data. We can look at changes in a specific area over time. And I just want to emphasize that at the field scale, we track and model each of the millions of farm fields through time, looking at changes in management practices, crop rotations, tillage intensity, cover cropping. So that information is on a field scale, but it's summarized and distributed at aggregated scales for public insights. And I really want to highlight this. These summarized data are freely available. You can visit CTIC's website to gain access, and the URL is there at the bottom of the screen. And so, yeah, I encourage you to check out their website. We also have options for you at the Dagan website and at Florosense as well, the Florosense platform that Anastasia will tell you more about. Next slide, please, Anastasia. So digging into the technology a little bit here, we rely on data from multiple satellite sensors, not just a single, it's not dependent on a single satellite sensor. And we integrate data across the entire season to make estimates of residue cover on the soil surface, translate that into tillage practices, and look at green signals for cover crops. And the example that we're showing here on the right is taken from some fields in Iowa, a cover crop rye field there. We track the level of greenness of a pixel over seasons, looking for patterns in the green signal that indicate if the pixel was cover cropped or if it had a commodity crop that was grew later into the summer and was harvested, or if it had no winter cover at all. Next slide, please, Anastasia. With these satellite observations in hand, we can really take a look at how our estimates line up with other sources for information. And we do that basically on two scales. We compare our satellite-based estimates to roadside observations at the farm field level, and then to ag census data that summarizes total acres in a particular practice at the county level. And what we see is, we've already collected more than 5,000 unique observations through time across more than 1,000 fields in 15 states, and we assembled that growing database by creating a mobile app and partnering with probably some of you all out there right now with certified crop advisors, crop consultants, soil and water conservation district officials, and we did that, in regions throughout the country, and we're going to need more help as we continue to expand our coverage. And we use these observations on the field to compare our satellite observations at the field. So we line up the ground observations with what we're seeing on that particular field with the OpTIS, and we do an assessment. And what we see is pretty good results for cover crops and for no-till, conventional till. We see accuracies, above 90%. And we also use a measure called Cohen's kappa that comes in at 0.7, which it's pretty good. And this is a measure that accounts for imbalanced numbers of observations in the data set, between no cover and cover crop, and as well as the associated probabilities that we would be matching by chance. So in all, on the field scale, data is not perfect, but it's quality, and we see similar results at the ag census scale. And so here we've got a slide that is a visual example of how we move from those measurements at the 30-meter pixel scale up to summaries on the farm fields, and then how we feed those into the DNDC biogeochemical model to look at outcomes like SOC. And I want to emphasize here that these data go back through time. I said they're longitudinal. We typically process data annually from the mid-2000s up through today. And this allows us to dig into patterns of management. Does a field show consistent use of no-till or consistent use of cover crops? And as you all know, consistent year-over-year use of no-till can have a big effect on soil health. And we've got sort of an example like that on the next slide there, Anastasia. Tracking and modeling each of the millions of farm fields through time and looking at the changes in management practices, again, crop rotations, tillage intensity, cover cropping. And we use that information from OpTIS to feed a soil biogeochemical model like DNDC, and this allows us to really understand the impact of practices on soil health and productivity and resilience at the field scale. And here in this example, we've tracked a field in Minnesota from 2005 through 2017, looking at this consistent use of conservation practices, and then using the DNDC model to track associated changes in SOC. And that's what you see there in the green line in the time series plot. We're looking at SOC as observed through OpTIS on that field. We see SOC increasing over the years. And we can also run counterfactuals, assuming, let's say, instead, if this grower did not use conservation practices, what are the likely outcomes with SOC? And we see that there in the red line. So it allows us to really make estimates of what's happening and compare that to what alternative scenarios might show us. So if we can go to the next slide. This is obviously a much broader view here. Most often we work with stakeholders who are interested in a really broad view of agriculture in the US. So here we're looking at results across the Corn Belt at the Huck 8 watershed scale. And just want to note, we also summarize at county scales, ag district, CRD scales, state scales, any political or natural boundary. And with this, with OpTIS at these scales, we can understand the spatial patterns and patterns through time. That really can help us answer, what are the baseline levels of adoption against what, we can measure improvement. How does the rate of adoption of these practices change over space and time? And what we're looking at here are rates of adoption of conservation tillage at the state scale. So each color there represents a different state. We're looking at Illinois, Indiana, and Iowa. And we're also looking at information from two sources here, from the NRCS CTIC Crop Residue Management Survey. That's the information that we see leading up to 2004-05 timeframe. And then we're looking at OpTIS results from 2005 up through 2018. And that 2004-05 timeframe was the year that funding was stopped for the Crop Residue Management Survey, and it sort of highlights the role that OpTIS can play in filling in some gaps there. And in terms of patterns here, we can see, after the increases in the use of conservation tillage in the 80s and 90s, those rates have typically leveled off around 50% in a lot of states that we've examined. And if we go to the next slide, we can look at the similar thing for cover cropping. In this case, yeah, we're looking at the adoption rates of cover crops at the state level. And you'll notice that y-axis, the rates are considerably lower than the rates of conservation tillage adoption, but they're really increasing, starting in some states in 2012, 13, and in other states really taken off in 2016, 17, 18, and we're updating these data as we speak. So I just have a few more slides before I hand it back over to Anastasia. I hope that by giving you some background into OpTIS and DNDC and how they've been applied, I hope that it's gotten you more thinking a little bit more concretely about the power of these data. And before I hand it over, I want to drive that home with this last slide here on potential uses of this sort of information. So what we're looking at here is, I think you all know really well, better than most, that 2019 was a really wet spring in a lot of areas in the US, and there was a lot of prevent plant spread across the Corn Belt. We looked at 3 counties with the highest rates of prevent plant, and we used remote sensing data to map fields that were able to successfully plant and separate those from fields which were prevented from planting in 2019, essentially creating 2 populations of fields in those 3 counties. And then we used the OpTIS database on conservation, on the historical use of conservation tillage and and cover cropping in those 2 populations. And what we found in all 3 counties that we examined was that the population of fields that were able to successfully plant, they had higher use rates of both conservation tillage and cover cropping than the fields that were prevented from planting. So I think this is pretty powerful. It's a limited study that we're working on expanding, but I think it captures pretty well the power of these tools and data to shine a light on the link between conservation practices and resilience. And so, yeah, before I hand the mic back over to Anastasia, if you go to the last slide from me there, Anastasia, I want to leave you just with the summary of the types of data and information that OpTIS and DNDC can provide, and how these data can then be turned into insights by combining with the Florosat platform at Florosat. So we talked a lot about the left column there, a lot about OpTIS data, and so I think you've got a sense for what we can provide there. DNDC, that's the soil biogeochemical model. Products from there include field-specific information about SOC, about greenhouse gas emissions, about reactive nitrogen, and other outcomes, including yield. And then by linking those data, with the Florosat platform, we can turn this sort of raw data into insights on optimal management. So we're obviously really excited about these tools, and we're excited about the growing partnership that we've got with Florosat, combining the Dagan science on soil health with the amazing agronomic insights that Florosat has been known for. It's really exciting, and stay tuned for what's coming next. Anastasia?
Thank you so much, Steve. Yeah, I hope everyone enjoyed that deep dive into how conservation practice monitoring and verification is done. Now I think you not only earned your credit for this webinar, but you can tell the same to everyone who will be listening to you. This was really comprehensive, and I want everyone to know that this is really state of the art. Now about the platform, and back to you, the CCAs, how can you access it? Of course, Steve has mentioned the link at the beginning that we'll share at the end, where you can go and just explore data, but that data is explored at quite a high level. Whilst what we want to give you, the advisors, in 2021 is the ability to actually put this data into practice with your farmers, and I will cover that, as well as how you can get more involved into the data collection on the ground that Steve has mentioned. So diving into Florosat, you saw data that was quite, I guess, isolated in itself. These were maps, whilst you obviously asking yourself, how can I get access to it, or how can people use it? FluroSense is a cloud-based platform that we developed at Florosat. It takes into account soil data, weather data, farm machinery data, as well as remote sensing, and collects this data through even farm management systems. We have a number of partners. I'll skip that here. Then we run the models in a way that Steve has just described, plus some additional agronomic models that have to take place as derivative on the data that Steve has presented on conservation. It's not just that you look at the tillage practice and think, okay, well, that's great, but how does it pay my farmer? Does it actually improve the situation long term? How exactly? What's the impact? It's answering those questions that are a bit more agronomic is where FluroSense comes in. What we're already good at is monitoring crop performance, tracking crop stress, giving numerous agronomists across the country reports and alerts via email on those crop performance and crop stress. As well as recommendations of crop nutrition. I would like to run you through how we see the holistic farm management, crop management practice, and of course open to your questions that you can put into the question box on the webinar. So when we look at the cycle, of course, you have the time when you plan and when the growers plant. Then there is a time to protect and make sure you produce optimally. And then there is a time to harvest. And at that point in time, you make many decisions around sustainability. And that's just such a busy time. And we think asking more of crop advisors to do in that busy time without giving the tools is just completely unreasonable. So starting from the start, the ability to use the information we presented kind of breaks down into, translates into dashboards, translates into scenario tools, and this is what I would like to present to you. There's ability to monitor crop performance, i.e. crop status, growth stages, using agronomic models, weather data, and satellite imagery. You hear this correctly. You don't have to visit the field to get this indication of the growth stage of the field anymore, especially if you're looking after many fields. This is very convenient. Of course, you can make it more accurate with your own observations, but when it comes to scale and accuracy and benchmarking, this is really the way to do it. Crop nutrient recommendations is something that by running biogeochemical models, you can look at the yield goals, look at the history of the rotation on the field, and this is where the cover crops really play into it. We have provided so far the crop nutrient recommendations, and we haven't experienced a huge surge in demand on the cover crop aspect of it, but it's picking up day by day as we speak to advisors. Then crop stress alerts, regular emails highlighting geospatially areas on the field where some stress is occurring and that are then being able to be scouted. Towards the end of the season, you would like to, of course, help your growers or yourselves if you manage a farm to understand the optimal harvest timing. So what is the optimal time? What's the dry down rates? How can you harvest senescent fields at the optimal moisture levels? At this point in time is where a lot of decisions are getting more complicated. And this is where we would like to support the advisors with providing the personalized conservation practices dashboard. So if you sit with your farmer and they have some basic data, they can combine it with the information that Steve has covered at the beginning of this webinar. And really, we will dive deeper into that screen. But we would like you to have the tool to evaluate the impact of adopting the conservation practice or changing the nutrient management to including manure or using the cover crop as something that particularly how it affects this farm. And we will dive into that in a moment. This product, as well as the last product, tracking sustainability practices, are those that are delivered in partnership with Dagan. And the sustainability practices adoption is really where we'd like to start. Steve has presented the maps on the more science level and the more field scale level, but there's also a view of the crop reporting districts, watersheds, counties. You can scale it up as much as you like. It's important if you're part of a large organization that is trying to understand how to actually distribute your attention, and maybe you're part of a smaller team that's trying to conquer a lot. We know that only small and mighty teams really make a difference in this world. So here we're looking at the data that Steve has covered from the science perspective in the interface of a FluroSense platform, where you can select on the right-hand side what crop type you would like to understand the adoption of the practices for. You can sub-select corn, you can sub-select beans, you can sub-select many other crop types that are detected in these areas. And for those crop types, we'll be able to filter the residue and tillage management map, which you can see. Darker red colors mean that there is a lot more conventional till and a lot less no-till used in those areas. And the darker blue is the opposite end of the spectrum, where majority of the fields are no-till or conservation till. And you can see it's broken down across the years through which we monitored it as well. As Steve mentioned, this information is produced every year, and now it's supported by the CTIC and the Nature Conservancy, but it's no longer part of, say, NRCS's service. And hence, we're talking to you today about how you can access this data publicly, as well as to contribute to continuous creation of the accurate data sets. Not only it's the residue and tillage management, but it's also the cover crops, soil organic carbon change of stocks, and soil organic carbon, and nitrous oxide flux. So these are the key layers that you can kind of key into at a large scale, as well as go down into the field level. This is not, some machine learning model estimate. This is proven science that has been ground truth and validated in numerous independent studies, as well as publicly available reports on it, demonstrate the accuracy of these estimates. How can we measure the accuracy? It's by having crop advisors across the country help us collect the data independently, which we can validate our estimates against. Now, Chris and the team at SAA has asked us to give you a bit of a preview of what's coming in the world of conservation and sustainability. And we would love those of you who are interested to reach out to us and talk more about it. We build this for agronomists. So if you have an opinion or you want to be a voice that is, talking to us all the time into our ear about how you want to use it, please reach out. With that in mind, I'm presenting to you an early kind of concept of the conservation practices tool that specifically for a field, for a farm, that you can import from a farm management system. We have numerous integrations with all major systems. You can import that farm data, only basic information, such as field boundaries, some crop types. And what we provide you in combination with OpTIS data, in combination with running biogeochemical models, is this estimate that is specific to that farm. If we have noted that this farm has not adopted conservation tillage at all yet in the last 5 to 10 years, if they did not have any cover crops, and it seems like the nutrient management is done conventionally, we're going to quantify what the potential effect would be of those practices on that farm. And we are showing here farm profitability, farm resilience effect, and environmental societal benefits of adoption of these practices. We also sometimes highlight disbenefits, if there are any. Most of you probably have either been aware of or listened to a presentation yesterday from the Soil Health Institute that was brilliant, where they looked at the Cargill and NRCS study of many farmers and the financials of how this pays out. Well, imagine if you can do this for any farmer that you work with using some basic data that doesn't, expose them or breach any kind of data privacy issues. It's something that you leverage public-private data sets, plus you add a little bit of data that specifies which field belongs to this farmer, and you're able to get these estimates to start a conversation whether these practices make sense. It seems like in this case, the long-term benefit would come from the rotation cover crop adoption in this area. And once again, these agronomic models at the back, which are modeling this. So it's grounded in the local weather, local soil, and the practices that we have observed on this farm. So this is what's coming. And in terms of what's happening right now, Steve spoke about the data collection and the project that we run every year by attracting data collectors, attracting CCAs and RCS, as well as postdocs at universities, a range of people who are passionate about conservation, to help us with a program that we're given a name. It's called Sustainability Watch. We are actively recruiting crop advisors to help us do roadside surveys, so no kind of field visits required, in the sense that you don't need to walk onto anyone's property, to monitor 20 or 30 fields in their area, in the driving distance from their home, where they can help us make observations that are geotagged with a mobile app that say, I see a cover crop over here, I see a till or no till over here, and revisit those fields in the space between now and July 6 times, so we have consistent observation of the practice pre-planting of the main crop, or potentially they have a winter cover crop there, and to continue those observations into the development of the main crop. We pay for this exercise. We, as you know, are part of the public-private partnership that is pushing forward the data collection and the monitoring of sustainability practices, and we want this effort to be ongoing. So it's not a fortune, but it's something that covers time and fuel. And for any of you who are interested, it's an official engagement. We offer a contract that says this is how much we're going to pay. If you submit the data, we provide the training almost individually to all of our data collectors, as well as we protect the information of the farmers. So we're not asking you to provide any private information, apart from the fact that, apart from anything that you could see when you're driving past a random field. And so all of these practices have been ironed out in years of this data collection. And in the particularly this year, this is the recruitment progress on this project Sustainability Watch. So you can see that we already have onboarded many advisors. All of the states that are green is where we have data collectors. The states that are gray is where we are not requiring data to be collected this year. We kind of do a bit of a shuffle every year. So we still need data collectors in Alabama, California, Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Louisiana, Minnesota, Montana, New York State, Pennsylvania, Vermont, Virginia, and Washington. And if you're in one of those states and you want to learn more about it, and roadside surveys is something that can be part of your routine, and you would like to support this project, then please reach out to us. Chris should be able to share with you these two links on what we discussed. One way to engage is, of course, to go and access that data right now on the CTIC website to really learn for the data set that's available there. If you fall into that area, how specifically your county performs. Bear in mind that it's not the entire US that is featured there, because the entire US is actually produced this year. Hence, we need the data collectors, which is my second point. This is an option for you. By no means it's an expectation. We loved for you to learn today from our work, to give us any feedback, any suggestions. But for those of you who are interested, there is such an opportunity to still get involved into some casual weekend data collection to improve the sustainability monitoring across the nation. And that's it from us. I would love to open it up for questions now. And Chris, if you have any questions, if you received them or anything for us to take already, I would love to do that.
Sure. Anastasia, Steve, thank you. Great presentation, much appreciated. And now we are going to go to questions. Anybody out there who still has questions, please submit them. We do have a nice list that's developed. I'll try to get through as many as possible, but I'd like to make note of one thing. You can see Anastasia's and Steve's contact information at the bottom of the screen at this time. If we don't get to your question, please reach out to them and they can get back to you. All right, so Anastasia, Steve, I'm just gonna throw the question out there and one of you can take it. And we're gonna start general and then maybe get a little more specific. So first of all, is the CRM and OpTIS data available for other countries beyond the US, Canada, Mexico, farther beyond? What sort of data availability do we have for other countries? Maybe Steve, take that one.
Sure. So as of today, the data are only available at for the Corn Belt as of today. In the coming month or so, those data will be expanded out from the Corn Belt into the Wheat Belt and into parts of the southeastern United States. And as Anastasia mentioned, going to extend to the continental United States at the end of this year. International is next on our agenda. So currently, it's just for the geographies I've outlined, but we're excited to extend the technology to South America, to Europe, and other places. And regarding the CRM data, CTIC has always been a great resource for that CRM data, and those data are still housed at CTIC and are available through the same or very similar platform to the one that the OpTIS data are available through there. But again, that's only for the United States.
All right, thank you, Steve, appreciate it. The next question I think is going to be more directed towards you, Anastasia, so I'll ask it. And here we go. Can you differentiate fluorescence from the Truterra platform? How is your platform different? And then this person goes on to ask, can this platform take data directly from a retailer's work order dispatch system in order to reduce the amount of time that it takes to upload field level data? And before you answer, Anastasia, I'll just say, here at the American Society of Agronomy, we don't show bias to one platform or another. We just show you various platforms. And we want to highlight how it connects to the science that's being done out there, how public-private partnerships bring this about, and how the data can be available to you. So Anastasia, maybe without talking too much in a competitive sense, how does your platform a little bit different? And maybe you could mention other platforms out there too. And I can certainly repeat the questions for you too, by the way. There were quite a few questions there.
No, thank you so much, Chris. I still remember them. Thank you so much. And we, both with Steve as scientists, and we wanted to be as transparent and as we have shared with you a lot of some of the open things is exactly how we're doing them. Great question on Truterra. Actually, they can be a partner of ours. We have had some discussions before. Truterra is the platform that is a bit more customer facing in a sense that it helps really for the farmers to see the score, for the retailer to work with that to the farmer. Truterra platform and the similar platforms, maybe to some extent you can say that Nori's carbon market can be seen similarly. Even Indigo's platform can also be seen in the same way, that our technology provides part of the backbone data pooling and scalable setup for those platforms. Truterra and similar platforms will still be able to run their specific analytics and advice on top of this data. So it's all very compatible, and we're very friendly and collaborative with those groups that you mentioned. We have had numerous discussions with Truterra team on both Dagan and FluroSat sides. In terms of how the retailer can view it, I will just answer briefly in terms of the data import that you asked for. Almost all of the major retailers platforms are connected to fluorescence, and it's very simple to just import the data. So the answer to the question, if I understood it correctly, is yes, absolutely. It's because of that it scales. Yes, thank you.
Great, thank you, Anastasia. The next question was submitted, I do believe, Anastasia, when you were talking and presenting, but I think it may apply to you, Steve, as well. So let me just ask, what crops, this person says, what crops has this been used on effectively? Now, maybe you want to talk about fluorescence, and what you're doing there, but also talk about, Steve, maybe a little bit about OpTIS DNDC and stuff like that. So I'll give it to both of you, whoever wants to go first.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you so much, Chris. So we are very specific on the crops in a sense that the core modeling from the fluorescence side, as well as currently on the Dagan side, but I would let Steve to add more, is most developed for the most commodity row crops. Cereals, legumes, oil seed, those types of crops. For fluorescence, we have a list of 22 crop types for which we can run quite sophisticated models, which includes further crops like cotton and potatoes. In terms of OpTIS and DNDC, Steve?
Sure. Yes, similar answer there. We apply OpTIS in the example I shared with you here, the Corn Belt and the expanded application due out in a month. We applied the algorithms across more than 25 crops, and we model 25 crops specifically through the DNDC model, and then make some generalizing assumptions for some of the smaller lower acre crops that appear. So we do provide estimates on those other crops, but the DNDC modeling is going to be a little less tuned to those outside that 25 main crops. We're also working to expand the OpTIS algorithms to cover cropping in between tree crops out west, and wine grapes and hops out in the Pacific Northwest. That's research that's ongoing and is not included in the release here, but we hope to have those out to folks soon.
All right, thanks to both of you for answering that one. Next question, and I think either of you can probably comment on this in some way, but maybe Anastasia, you first. And are there any considerations for providing this data to crop insurance companies for use in risk mitigation modeling?
Great question. Very forward-looking attendee. Thank you so much. Currently, we are very specific on what we do with the data, in a sense that we effectively only work with our customers to access this data. We're currently not working with financial services providers or insurance providers on this. There's certainly some interest, but we're still in discussions with several insurance companies as potential partners to actually find the best spot for them to be able to utilize this data. Interestingly, in other countries, because Florosat has, we have our fields across many millions of acres in 45 countries. I can actually tell you that in Argentina, this case of crop insurance using such data is interestingly a little bit more advanced because of how their market is structured there in the private sector. So this has certainly been a conversation in several cases in Latin America and Europe and in Australia, where we work equally extensively. There is currently no use of the data you're looking at for insurance. I want to be clear. But there is conversations separately with insurance providers to actually be able to accommodate farmers' adoption of practices and potentially to see this data as a reduction of risk when providing insurance policies, as well as something that allows to make a payment on the claim with much shorter turnaround when this data is available to the insurance provider.
Thank you, Anastasia. Yeah, Steve, anything you'd like to add?
I would just add a small part of sort of from the science side, how excited we are to really expand on the sort of analysis that I shared with you on the crop resilience piece in the 2019 wet spring and prevent plant, but to just really expand that type of analysis out to provide a backbone of wide coverage but regionally specific information about the links between the use of these practices and risk. I think there's a lot of potential there that we haven't fully explored, but that sort of the door is opened with this sort of data, and we're really excited to help contribute to that underlying knowledge that can form a better understanding of risk.
All right, thank you. Okay, I think we do have time to get to a few more specific technical questions, so I'm going to pivot to that now and get off these general questions. The first one is, this individual says, soil organic carbon change over time modeled by DNDC is quite interesting. What depth in the soil is the DNDC modeling done to in general? Steve, I think that's probably directed towards you, I'm guessing.
Sure, and I'm not the DNDC expert, so I'd encourage you to follow up. You can follow up through me at the email there, and I can get you in touch with the scientists who have all the exact information. But for that Corn Belt application and the expanded application coming out in a month or two, we model to 50 centimeters. There's flexibility in the model, in terms of depth that we can model. And Anastasia mentioned, the importance of and the role that validating our products, it's really important that we do that. And so we change that depth of modeling to correspond with the depths measured in the field in individual studies. So yeah, the answer is we can model to different depths. The application I shared with you, 50 centimeters is the depth to which we model.
Perfect, thanks, Steve. I'm just going to keep building out on this DNDC train of thought here. This person asks, has there been any in-field validation with the model over the years?
Yeah, so yeah, I think that builds off of sort of what I just said there, but on the OpTIS side, for the OpTIS models, the practice models, I think we've delved into that. We use the roadside observations and census data to understand the performance. On the DNDC side, I just alluded to it in the answer previous, in that we've assembled a very large database of peer-reviewed studies and extracted information from those studies. And we use that to calibrate and validate the DNDC model. Yeah, I hope that answers.
Yeah.
Again, email me and I can put you in touch with Pete Ingram and Bill Salas to clear up any further questions.
Just to add to Steve's point, yes, Bill Salas, the chief executive at Dagan, will be able to answer this, but I just wanted to reinforce that there's multiple published, peer-reviewed, independently done studies that show that DNDC performs out of the 20-ish models for carbon that the independent institutes have used, performs as overall best or second best, depending on the categories. And I'm sure the Dagan team will love to share those studies with you. It's fantastic when someone takes your work, applies it somewhere, and it works perfectly. So we're definitely not ashamed of sharing that.
Yeah, right on. Thank you, Anastasia. Thanks for that comment. I think we'll finish with just one final question here as we run out of time. This individual asks, is there a growing trend of customers using these decision support tools? OpTIS, DNDC, FluroSat. Maybe both of you can answer for our last question here.
Yes, there is certainly a growing pool of customers. You might be able to look us up, either of us with Steve or our companies, and you will see that we work with a number of major retailers, CPG companies, food processors that are using these systems, using them for different geographies, somewhere more intensely, somewhere less intensely. But it's certainly very well adopted by industry already, in the sense that these tools separately up until now have been very well used, and now we're really working together with Dagan on bringing the tools together. So you can not only access the data on one side and access the decision support tools on the other side, but exactly as we showed you it can be actually done all in one place, which will be one platform serving the whole range of customers, from input to retail to food processors, all the way to CPG across the supply chain. So definitely excited to answer that question, and it's great to share that indeed there's good commercial traction behind this, as well as public-private partnerships. So both sides of the equation are well underway.
Thank you, Anastasia. Steve, any final comments before we wrap that question up?
I would just support exactly what Anastasia said. Yeah, interest is growing, and we're really excited to partner with Florosat and get the word out to all of the people with the growing interest.
All right. Well, perfect. Thanks to both of you today. And thanks to our audience for joining. I hope you learned a lot and you see the opportunity that's available to you if you want to get involved. And of course, I want to say thank you to Florosat. Their generous support of this webinar made it free of charge to you. So thanks everyone for joining today. We hope you join shortly for more American Society of Agronomy and Soil Science Society of America webinars. Have a wonderful day and have a great week. Take care. Bye-bye.